Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Bernt-Santy. Very exciting today. Our guest is Suzanne Axelsson. I almost did it. We were practicing before we recorded to make sure I was saying her name wrong, and I almost said it the wrong way to make sure I was saying it right. Anyway, welcome, Suzanne. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to let you introduce yourself here in a minute, but we're going to start, we're going to have a conversation about this book that came out in the last year, which I loved for multiple reasons. One, because of the excellent early childhood content, but also all of the weaving analogies and metaphors. I'm sort of a little bit of a weaver, so that was an interesting context. But the book is called The Original Learning Approach, Weaving Together Playing, Learning, and Teaching in Early Childhood. So welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you.
What do you want folks to know about you?
Oh, based in Sweden. So despite writing the book in American English, which was a challenge for me because I'm originally British.
Yeah.
So my spelling had to be constantly checked.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think that's given me this way of understanding different perspectives, having come from one culture, coming into another culture and learning and trying to work out how to make the best part of everything come to the front.
Yeah, and you just did a book in Swedish too then, right?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
my goodness.
Which I never thought I was ever being able to write a book in Swedish, but I did.
That's
which
nice.
Actually it's working on just one of the threads from the original learning approach. So I focus on risk, on the risk thread, and but weave in how the other threads impact that. So it's much more about risky play, also risk in education and social risks and emotional risks. So
that sounds interesting. I don't read Swedish. I could probably find someone. I grew up in a tiny rural town that we claimed to be the Swedish capital of Nebraska. So I could probably find someone back home who could help me with it. At any rate, thank you for being here. I'm so thrilled. This is really nice to have you here. We're going to start with a quote. Well, let me say this first. There's really three things I'd really love to hear you talking about, but we'll go as we go. But one is the ethics of play that you discuss, and then you introduce a couple of terms, the play ecosystem and play responsive. That I think, I mean, it was really hard to go through all my highlights the other day and see what we could maybe focus on. But those were the three that jumped out for me. So the quote to start things, and this is in your book, it's on page 34, and you say, put simply, children are not given the permission to play that they have a right to. So can you talk a little bit about that, and then maybe you can talk about play ethics or the ethics of this conversation?
I think there are a lot of play, or children engage in play, and it gets labeled as behavior and therefore needs to be corrected. And then there's a lot of play types that adults think is too loud, or it's too risky and too dangerous, and all of these different labels get attached to it, and the children get stopped. So they don't get a full repertoire. And I think, of course, some play we do have to intervene and stop. It is dangerous because they're still learning. But I think sometimes we're a little bit too quick to come in and to forbid some play types and some play forms that children really should have access to, because I think we need all of it.
Right. And I think a lot of that, at least what I see, it comes from some teachers feel like to be a good teacher means I always have things in control. And some of that play looks out of control or feels out of control. And I mean, I think there is a sincere concern for safety, but it's sort of a misguided concern.
I think we need to have balanced risk assessments where we're not just looking at what are the dangers, but we're trying to see what is the play value and what are the benefits. So, and then by us going through all three of these, like the dangers, the value, and the benefits, and then making a decision about, do I say no, or do I need to help and intervene a little bit by giving suggestions of how to make this a bit more safe? Because the value and the benefits of this play is totally worth a scrape on the knee.
Yeah.
And sometimes a scrape on the knee isn't worth it. So we have to really look at all of it and make sure it's balanced.
Sure. The listeners will have heard me tell the story a lot because I've told it a lot, but I remember vividly one day I was working in a preschool program where I had grad students working with me, and some children were coming down the slide and a couple were trying to go up the slide. It was a wide, like 2-lane slide. And the grad students were very nervous, and I just kind of moved closer to the slide, but I didn't stop it. And one of them asked me, and I was like, no, let's just watch and see what happens. And we got to see so much negotiating and communicating and idea having during that couple of minutes of them navigating themselves around each other on that slide. And when we came back inside at the end of the morning, I said, let's talk about what you saw. And they made this long list. And I said, which piece of that do you wish had never happened? Like which of those experiences do you wish those children hadn't had? And that was a good starting point for me to talk about this risk benefit analysis that you're describing. You had 3 questions about play ethics here. Do we provide play because it's the right thing to do, or because it is our duty, or because it will make the world a better place? Is there a right answer?
No, there's no right answer. It's a personal answer. And I think it can be a combination of those, or it can be something completely different. But I think what's really interesting is to start thinking about what motivates me as an adult to ensure children have access to play and have permission to play. And I think I probably somewhere in between, it's the right thing to do and the world is a better place. I don't think it's my duty.
Right.
I think maybe it is a duty. I don't know.
Well, because I was thinking about these 3 questions, and I tend to the last 2, or I mean the first and the last, the right thing to do and making the world a better place. But then I feel like it's my duty then, because it's sort of under attack. Like it's my duty to provide.
Maybe it's our duty to advocate for play rather than my duty to make sure children are playing. And I think sometimes I feel that some teachers or adults, not even just teachers, are really focusing on making sure children are playing. And therefore this is changing the way that children have permission to play. But suddenly they're being forced to play, and then I think it stops being play. Because of this way of being, you must play in this way. This duty takes over to ensure that everyone is playing. And if you have a very specific adult way of seeing what play is, then that's going to change how you're going to provide. So this is why I think it's really complicated. We need to really kind of review and reflect on our own ethics of why we're providing play, what we think play is. And understanding how we're enabling that at the same time.
So I want to ask you a little bit about the definition of play. I know you talk about it in the book, but I didn't bookmark that page. So I'm just going to ask you, when because you just mentioned, what do we mean when we're talking about play? So what do you mean when you're talking about play?
So for me, I ended up just choosing 2 words, which was joy and choice. Choice because you've got to choose to participate in it. You choose that you're in it, and you can choose to leave it. So the child has choice. And joy, for me, the opposite of joy is not being sad. The opposite of joy is being depressed. In joy, you have a full range of emotions.
Right. Because I can see that being pushed back on a little bit, that, sometimes when children play, they aren't showing this beautiful happiness that we think of a lot of times when we think of joy.
And I think when you're depressed as well, you can have a full range of emotions, but everything is just harder and heavier. And while when you're feeling this kind of sense of joy, everything is easier. Even when you're angry, it's easier to regulate that anger. And then eventually it can spill over until you're too angry. and then the anger kind of disrupts the joy part, and then it stops being play. Because
that's
the anger
brilliant. I'm so glad you came on the show. Just that one piece. One thing that was really powerful and sort of mind-changing for me about the book, there was a lot that gave me a lot to think about. But one thing, I think you mentioned that even an adult-led activity can be play if those elements of joy and choice are there. Like if the child can leave that adult, and I had sort of been, I have a tendency to have a knee-jerk reaction to anything that's adult-led being called play. So I thought that was really interesting.
I think while it's being, I think if all of the children are choosing to be there, choosing to participate, and they also have choice to leave, and there's that sense of joy that everyone is feeling, then I think it can shift into a state of play. Because I think it has to be very careful about how the adult is doing that. I think for the most part, when it's adult-led, it's playful. But it has the potential to shift into play. And I think some adults can play with children as equals, as a democratic kind of space. But on the whole, when I'm doing my activities and it's shifting into play, it's usually me, I'm taking steps back.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's being taken over by the children, and then it's their choices and it's their joy. So I think maybe it starts as teacher-led, and then it goes in together-led, and then maybe child-led.
Yeah. I think that's such an interesting addition to my thinking about, what is play and what is the adult's role. And that's often the question for so many people who are thinking about wanting to be more, have spaces where children can truly play, as opposed to school-like kinds of early childhood settings. A lot of times that's what they worry about, is what's my role then? So maybe this is a good time to shift into talking about being play responsive. If you want to kind of describe what that means.
So for me, play responsive requires that the children play. They actually have their own autonomous play. And that I observe this play to understand what it is that the children are learning, how they're learning it, what kind of things they're interested in, both as individuals, as a group. And then I designed my teaching moments that I have with the children using that inspiration and that information, so that it is most likely to be accepted and to be motivating for the children. Because children are not going to learn unless they're motivated.
Right.
And play is where their brain is the most motivated. I mean, the whole point of play is for the brain to kind of connect with the world and make sense of the world. So if I'm tuning into that, then I know it's going to be activating the brain in the best way and the most likely way for them to understand.
So when you're talking about motivation, are you talking about like intrinsic, or is it something the adult does? Yeah,
I mean, of course, I can do things that can provoke their thinking. I can do things that might invite them into testing something out. So I'll be doing all sorts of different things, because I don't want them to just swim around in their own little pool of joy. I want to cause some ripples and maybe some waves in there, so they can maybe go and explore another, body of water as well.
You're so good at metaphors. So, and I think there's so many, there's so many labels in this conversation about play, and even we can't even just say play. It's free play or scaffolded play or guided play or play with a purpose and all those things. So again, play responsive just sort of dropped something new into the ways I was trying to think through, and the ways I try to talk about play. And I thought it was an interesting direction.
Because the children have to have their play. And I think sometimes there's a risk if we're saying play-based or, purposeful play
with a bear.
It's hijacking children's play. And I think it's in the end, it's autonomy that we want. And children's autonomy is the language of children's autonomy is play. So if they're not having access to enough play, they're not having access to enough autonomy. If they don't have enough autonomy, their well-being is going to be affected, and they're going to try and recover that sense of well-being, often by trying to find ways of empowering themselves, and that can sometimes be by being mean to others because that makes them feel powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So in the groups where I've been working play responsively, working very much with listening so that children all listen to each other, so empower the children, there've been none of these kind of dynamics of where, you know, children saying, you can't come to my birthday party, those kind of things, because they don't need to. They don't need to exercise that kind of power because they already have enough power to feel strong in themselves, and they know they can contribute, and they know they can participate, and they know their ideas are being listened to by adults and the other children. So they don't have to try and make themselves bigger than what they are because they already are big enough for themselves at that moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. It really ties in with, so I've got a writing project going where I've been reading a lot about and thinking a lot about play and mental health and mental well-being. And a lot of what you just described, I think, has also been in the things I've been reading about, about play's impact on well-being for children. You talk about autonomy. I think for some people, and certainly at one point in my career, autonomy meant independence and doing it by yourself. But I get the feeling that's not exactly what you're meaning when you say autonomy and autonomous play.
So it's I'm talking about autonomy as a collective thing.
Okay.
So it's a way of self-governance. So you're in control of yourself and your own destination, but that comes with rights and responsibilities.
Okay.
So you have the right to have this autonomy and to do things that you like, but you also have the responsibility that other people have their autonomy. And how can we work together to ensure that my autonomy is not limited by someone else, but I am not limiting somebody else's autonomy. So this is what I'm working with, so every child's autonomy becomes a collective responsibility, not just by me, but with each other. And this is a lot of the listening things that I did in the philosophy with children helped with this by being able to listen to each other and take responsibility for each other's emotions, feelings, to help not trigger each other, being aware of if I do this, that other person will react like that, and I don't like it when they react like that, so I have to take responsibility over my actions. So, you know, there's a lot to think about, and I think people often talk about the rights of children and the right to play, but they don't talk about the responsibility. And every child has to be responsible as well for themselves and for others, so that we're not destroying each other's kind of play frames and ways of playing.
It sounds like, I mean, what you're describing seems to me a much more authentic way to think about children's social and emotional learning or development. You know, at least here in the United States, it's such a focus right now, and everybody's trying to put together, you know, packages and curriculums with the aim of improving behavior, essentially, and sometimes improving classroom compliance. But I think it misses the mark so often. I know. So what as I'm listening to you, I was like, oh, this seems much more authentic to achieve the same, you know, even if your goal is compliance. A healthier.
I'd rather have consensus than compliance.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, me too. I just, you know, I'm just thinking about how SEL is framed sometimes. And I like your version better. I guess what I'm saying is I like your version better.
So what I ended up doing was that the children got really good at making arguments. And they can make their case. So it's not an easy thing to do, but at the same time, they knew that if they could make a good argument, the chances are I would change my mind. But if they didn't make a good argument, then I would say, well, you know, these are the reasons why this argument isn't good enough, and we can't do that at the moment. So they knew that they were always welcome to challenge my nose or these things that I said, and quite often they got really good at it, and then the parents complained, but not in a bad way complained. They made a joke complaining, saying how good their children had become at arguing their case, and the parents did a lot of things that they hadn't really wanted to do, but then they enjoyed because the children were right. They could explain why this was the right thing to do, and the parents realized that they had zero argument.
Yes, I love the children were right. I just love that. It's just that idea that sometimes, yeah, they are. We just need to give them that chance.
And the skills to be able to practice how to communicate these ideas that they have.
Which takes me back to those adults who wonder what my role is if I'm not actively leading, actively planning, actively and solely teaching, delivering data to them, delivering information, then what's my role? You just described really complex thinking that would require expertise and reflection and practice, and some self-awareness. And that's, I think, for someone who's worried about losing their kind of teacher ego or their teacher expertise or position.
No, I definitely had teacher moments.
It's just a shift. Yeah.
So I always had one kind of session every day where I was teaching. It was what I knew was my teaching part. And philosophy with children was one of my teaching moments, but basically I'm teaching by guiding their dialogue. I would do an art session each week. So it would be an activity. Quite often these activities were and more exploration. So they always went into play, nearly always. But often there were ways to practice how to listen to each other, how to be respectful of each other. So everything was kind of feeding into each other. So their play would inform me what kind of question to ask in the philosophy. The philosophy session was giving me what kind of knowledge they had so that I could design activities that would work. And a lot of the activities were giving opportunities for the children to practice the skills they needed to be able to listen to each other. And this over time, because it was constantly, it's messy and, rhizomatic and everything feeds into each other. It's not this nice, tidy line. But I was constantly thinking, what do the children need from me so that they can be better at playing, basically. They need knowledge, random facts. They need stories. They need experiences, sensory information and input. They need words. They need to know how to listen. They need to how to self-regulate. So there's all of these things. So all of these things I would be helping them with in the activities and the lessons, with the book reading and the talking. And so and eventually it just made their play better.
Again, you're as I listen to you, I just keep pulling out specific words that I want to hear you talk more about. But you've talked several times or mentioned several times listening, and again, I think that's something that gets misinterpreted sometimes. And when some of us are talking about children listening, we mean obeying. Following a rule or something.
They're not listening to me.
Yes, exactly. How can I get them to listen? But you're talking about a deeper kind of more of a two-way kind of of listening, right?
Yes, or a multiple way of listening. So I need to listen to the children and the children listen to me. But most important is the children listen to each other, because that's where we all become empowered. Before the children learn how to listen to each other, I have to go in and resolve and help them with so many things, which if they're listening to each other, as in genuinely listening to understand what the other person is trying to say or why they're doing it, then they don't need me to come in and police them. And they don't even need to police each other, because they understand, okay, you did this and this is reason, and this, I didn't like it. And they can say, oh, why didn't you like it? Oh, because of this. And they have these little dialogues. So, and it doesn't come overnight.
Yes, important, to mention that.
It doesn't come overnight. It took, so I worked with the same children from when they were 2 until they left school at the age of 6. And we did philosophy every week, and we did all of these little exercises, but I would say the majority of our day was play. I didn't teach them to learn to read and write, but when they showed an interest, they did. And so I had several that could read and write before they left without ever having taught them, just because I gave them the right impetus to carry on what they're doing. And it always kind of spreads. Once one starts, it starts spreading.
Yes.
So all of my children could basically write a few things before they were required, and that's only through play. But and I think it's noticing what the children are doing.
Yeah,
that helps. Helping them to listen to each other and listen to understand. And all of our philosophy sessions started with, we listen with our eyes, or with our ears, with our eyes, with our mind and our heart. Because we listen to the words that have been said. We look and read the body language. Are they upset? Are they happy? How is this information? We then use our minds to think critically and creatively about what that person said and how we can respond. And we listen with our heart, because we always need to listen with empathy, so that we are respectful in how we are listening and how we are responding to that. And then our philosophy sessions would start with a stimulus, and then the next bit would be a thinking pause, where we gave a minute where the children were just completely quiet to think about what they thought about that question or that stimulus and how they were going to respond. And what the beautiful thing of that was is my children stopped saying, I don't know, when I asked them a question. And they would say, I need a thinking pause. And they all would come back with something. And I think very often we ask a question, the child doesn't have the time to process what's being said, how to put that back into words, and then to say it. And I learned quickly as well, which children do I ask first, because their answer will give guidance to other children. Because I had children who with delayed language, children with other languages than Swedish, and all of this would then help them. So, and I wrote down everything that they were saying as well. So I have like one child's Swedish language development completely there, from when it was just sounds in the beginning to sounds with a couple of words to full-on sentences and then complex sentences towards the end. Their parents could read all of these every week.
That's amazing.
Think, wow.
Yeah. So you're talking about the philosophy session and starting with a stimulus. Do you have an example of what a stimulus might be in one of those?
Oh, we had so many different ones. So I would always have the same one at just before Christmas. And I would ask them, what is the color of Christmas? And they would all come with their ideas of, it's gold is Christmas because of this, this, and this. Red is because of this reason. And so they would all give, and then someone would say, well, it's pink, and I said, why? Because it's my favorite color. So they all had their reason. The first year I did it, when they were 3, all but 2 of the children, we were 10 in that group, or we were 13 the first year. All but 2 of them said their favorite color. They couldn't make the distinction between, their favorite color was more important than the Christmas color. And then, but in the final years, at the 3rd year we did it, they all said Christmassy color. So that I could see how they were processing the different ways of thinking and the different connections that we're making. So once we'd collected all of these colors, we would then discuss, okay, we're going to choose 2 of those colors to create a Christmas painting with. Which 2 of these colors should we choose? So then they have to discuss amongst themselves which of these colors and why those colors, and they have to come to some form of consensus. And they do that. And then we would make a Christmas painting together, often, and it would be together. So the whole idea was collaborating. Often using the light table or magnetics, or different experiences, sensory experiences, and then that would become their Christmas art to send home. So instead of doing something that was, this is the tradition of Christmas or whatever, we explored their own personal traditions of Christmas and what was, and why these colors were powerful and what they meant to them and how they connected to them. And so it was a different way of doing it. So I've done questions like, are fairies real? Which animal would be the leader of the forest? And all of these different things. So
I want to have those conversations.
And robots robots think and feel? And that came from the children's own concerns because of they'd seen we'd seen a robot, one of the rovers up on Mars. And so because they were learning about robots, and they saw this film about the rover on Mars, and it got left there, and they were all crying. They thought it was so upsetting that this robot would just be left up there. So then we said, oh, does a robot have a heart? So we built a robot to find out, and we still didn't know. They told me in the philosophy session, if robots have feelings, because feelings come from the heart and the brain. That's what they said. So if a robot has a heart and a brain, then it probably
he could have feelings. Wow. Yeah. That's such a good reminder of the difference between what Lillian Katz wrote about academic skills and intellectual skills. So many group times focus on questions the teacher asks to gauge what facts the children know already,
testing.
And it's testing. And this is really, you talked about seeing how their thought processes are working. And I think that's more valuable information for ongoing work with children than whether they can get the right answer during story time or calendar time.
Talking about this last week, calendar. How I've been observing different teachers, and they would ask, what day is it today? And the children would be randomly guessing days.
Yes.
And I'm like, what is the point of this? Because so many of these children are getting it wrong, and they're getting it wrong daily.
Right.
Why not just say, today's Tuesday? Just leave it like that. They've learned it's Tuesday. They haven't been grilled and tested and got it wrong all those times. And the funniest thing is it's always embarrassing admitting this, but when I was clearly too old, but very young, my dream job was to be the person who invented the name of the day of the week, because it hadn't dawned on me that they repeated. And then when it dawned on me that, it goes round, it's a repetition, it's 7 days. I remember telling my mum, "God, that's so smart." And my mum's look on my face, on her face, looking back at me, going, "What you thought? What?"
I love that. But even that is an example of deep thinking on your part rather than just memorization.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I love that story.
But I think it is like some children who have problems with their working memory, learning the days of the week or the months of the year is just not an essential skill. You pick up your phone.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not an essential skill today.
Yeah. I observed a group time, a calendar time with 3 to 5 year olds, and some of them were getting ready to go to kindergarten shortly after this. And so they did the calendar thing where, what day is it? And everybody's guessing. And finally someone randomly gets it right. Like, yay, what day, they did that for the day and the number and the month. And then they put, and it was April when we were doing this. Then they brought out a flip chart, and they put across the top of the flip chart, what do you think kindergarten will be like? And the children started yelling out month names. It was clear that was their experience, was like, one of these is randomly going to be right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a connection to any of the content.
I think another bizarre thing is this standardized seasons thing you get.
Yeah.
With 3 months of every
of the weather. Yeah.
Yeah. And I moved to Sweden. Literally in England, it is 3 months of every season. That's exactly what it is. And I moved to Sweden, and I was like going, nothing, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It was 7 months of winter, and then 2 weeks of spring.
Delightful.
And then a couple of months of summer, and then a couple of weeks of autumn, and then winter began again.
And then winter again.
But it was different kind of gradients of winter. And I thought, on the chart, he kept saying it was spring, and I'm looking out, and I was thinking, that's snow and -degrees. That's not spring.
Yes. Yeah. Well, even climate change doesn't
fit. It's going to change everything as well. But then I discovered that the indigenous people here in the Nordic countries, so this in Sápmi, the Sami people, they're in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia, or the current geographical areas of those. They have 8 seasons.
Oh.
And so there was winter, and then there was winter, spring, and then there was spring, and then there was spring, summer. So they had all of it. And I was like going, that makes sense.
That's much more realistic.
That belongs to here. That makes sense.
Uh-huh.
And we have the wrong kind of seasonal calendars on our preschool and school walls here in Sweden.
Yeah.
Because we've got colonial British ones that only work in Britain.
Yeah.
And maybe certain states in the US.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Yeah, living in the Midwest of the US, we get them all, but not everybody does get them all the seasons. So boy, this is going by so fast and so interesting. I don't think that I've asked you about the play ecosystem yet. You've kind of, I mean, I think everything that you've talked about so far, of course, probably fits into that, but you use that term, and I think that's really interesting use of language. So would you talk about where that comes from, how you came to that term?
I realized that everything that I did was going to affect something else. You know, like if you remove the trees in the forest, it's going to affect the ecosystem in the forest. You can't, or if you put in a new foreign animal in there, it's going to affect the entire ecosystem there. So whether we take away or we add to, it's going to make a change to the ecosystem. And it's the same with the play ecosystem. You have the children that can be played, the relationships between all of the children, the relationships between the adults and the children. Then there's all the stuff that we have and the environment that we have. And if we make changes in the environment, it will make an impact on the play as well. What knowledge children have will also impact the way they play. So sometimes I'm feeding in knowledge about dinosaurs and how they walk, so they know, and suddenly you can see that the children are walking with those kind of information. Or, you know, you tell them about that cats fold their tongue backwards to lift them, and dogs fold their tongue upwards, you know, that way to lick, and suddenly they're all trying to do that with their But you can see that in their play, when they become whatever it is, if you give them some little bits of information, they're suddenly processing it in their play. So, you know, a new child will make a change to that environment. Different furniture, the weather will also make a change. How big the space is, adult attitudes will make a change, changing of staff will make a change. Sometimes it'll be for the better, sometimes it'll be for the worse, sometimes it's just different. But everything impacts each other. So, you know, the more children play, maybe they're going to be processing these facts that you gave, and it gets that knowledge builds as well as what knowledge you're given is going to impact the play. So it's not one direction, it's going in multiple directions all the time, exactly the same as it would do in the ecosystem. It's not just this neat little circle, it's messier and more dynamic.
I think one of the reasons that so it took me a little bit longer than I expected to read this book, and one of the reasons is there was so much just rich language for me to stop and think about specific words, and why did she choose that, and what does that add, and how does this change the conversation. And it's one of my favorite things about what you've done with the book. And play ecosystem, I think, can be really a powerful because I think the words we use change the way we think, which change the way we act, right? So if we're thinking about an ecosystem, we're thinking about those kinds of ripple effects and changes and responses, and it requires us to be a little bit more curious and flexible than just assuming every group will be the same as long as I offer the same things.
And I think it really is a healthy reminder that everything that we do, we say, our little movements, our small decisions, how we place things, everything impacts the play ecosystem, and how the children are going to feel that they have permission to play, how they're going to access knowledge, how they're going to use the space. All of it is, we have so much power. As the adult, we are the dominant species, kind of thing in that ecosystem, and we can either make it thrive, or we can make it really hard for the children to survive. So we have to really think about our actions and our attitudes all of the time.
It's so, I think it just adds so much depth to our work when we when we think about things in the way that you're describing and the way that you outline in the book. You give people working with children freedom to go deeper, or an invitation to go deeper. Whether they feel they have that freedom or not, I don't know, but you've certainly offered them that as a direction to go, and I think that's really meaningful. And I appreciated it a lot. I highlighted a lot. Also, I read in the tub a lot. So the pages are a little wrinkly for being like sat down on the side of the tub so I could write a note or something like that. So this is already a well broken in book for me. Is there anything that you want that you were hoping we'd be able to talk about, or that you want to add before we wrap up?
I think the most important for anyone who's wanting to kind of change the way they do things or to think more deeply is to take small sustainable steps. I think it's dangerous when sometimes I've been in places where the boss has been wanting to make massive changes.
I've been that boss.
And it's just not being sustainable. And I think sometimes yes, it can be frustrating for some of the educators who want to go at a faster pace, but I think we need to make sure that everyone is coming along on this journey and that they're getting the support they need to make this journey. So we're not leaving them and getting lost in the forest kind of thing, that we're finding out ways that, yes, maybe I could go ahead and scout the area and come back and let them know and say, this is the safe way to go. We can go this way. It's pretty much the same way we do with children. We find out ways, and to genuinely be curious about the children, to genuinely be curious about colleagues as well. Why do they think and do things the way that they do, and what can I do to make that easier for them? And in the same way that I wanted my children to listen to each other, maybe to listen to each other as, like a kind of professional love between adults as well, not just Jules Page writes about professional love for the children. But maybe we need professional love for each other too.
Oh, that's so good. Yes. We've talked about Jules on a couple of episodes with Carol Garbo Murray coming on and talking about professional love. So again, I want to tell everybody the title of the book is The Original Learning Approach, Weaving Together Playing, Learning, and Teaching in Early Childhood. But also you have a blog and places that people can find you online, right?
Yes. So I have a blog, Interaction Imagination. I can be found with the same name, Interaction Imagination, on Instagram. And I write little daily thinkings and stuff there, and images. I have a Facebook group called The Original Learning Approach, which can come in, and there's lots of information and blog posts and other thinkings and dialogues, and so there's quite a bit. One
thing that I appreciate about your social media is that which I don't do on mine, I post it and I run. I don't come back into the comments very much, but you do spend a lot of time thoughtfully responding and sort of being part of those conversations.
I think for me, that's the most important. It's the same with when I'm working with the children. It's like, if I've given them a provocation, I don't just leave them with it. It's like I have the responsibility to meet any of their responses. And I think if I'm ever posting anything on social media, then I have the responsibility to take care
to be part of it.
Responds to me.
To take care of them. That's a good way of thinking about it. Well, I'm not very good at that. I need to get better at that, but I really appreciate that's one of the things you do on your pages. So thank you again so much for being here and coming on and sharing time. I know we have a pretty big time difference between us.
It's coming up to 11:15 in the evening.
Okay. Well, I will let you get ready for your bed then. But thank you. I appreciate it. And the book has been really wonderful. And I hope everybody checks it out. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.